Welcome to the Counting and Clapping tutorial series created by the junior high band teachers of the Gilbert Unified School District in Gilbert, Arizona. Counting and Clapping tutorial number 6, Eighth Rests. At the end of this tutorial, you should understand how to count and clap eighth rests, how to count and clap various rhythm patterns containing a mixture of notes and rests that include eighth rests. To be successful, you need to already understand the concepts taught in these earlier tutorials: all rhythm tree tutorials, basic time signatures and beats, counting and clapping part 1 conventions, part 2 whole, half, and quarter notes, part 3 whole, half, and quarter rests, part 4 ties and dotted half notes, and part 5 eighth notes. We'll start by reviewing the counting and not clapping of eighth rests. Remember to check the top number of the time signature for the required number of beats per bar. In our example, the top number is a 4, so all measures must have 4 beats. Be sure to write the counting directly underneath the rests and number all of the beats consecutively. Use a plus sign in between the numbers. 1 plus, 2 plus, like that. Rests don't get claps. Pulse the rests with your hand apart while you count out loud. Say "and" where you see the plus sign. Our example here, we have 3 and 4 and. Eighth rests are twice as fast as quarter rests. Here's a video showing the correct way to count and not clap 4 quarter rests.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now here's a video showing you that eighth rests are counted twice as fast as quarters.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and.
When we start to mix eighth notes and eighth rests together, along with other types of note values, we start to see some common mistakes. Forgetting to use a plus sign causes more numbers than the time signature allows. Our time signature has a 4 on the top, so every measure must have 4 beats. If we put a number under every single eighth rest here in measure 1, we'll have too many numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We didn't use the plus sign, and we have more than 4 beats in that measure. That's why that is wrong. Using the same number more than once in a bar is also a common mistake that we see. In this example, we have 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and. Well, again, we need to get to 4 and have 4 beats in the measure, so this would be wrong. One of the biggest mistakes we see is when people reverse the number and the plus sign and put the plus sign first. In this example, we should start every measure with the number 1. That's our rule. But here we have and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and we didn't start with the number 1. So that is another common mistake. Even if we start out right, like in measure 4, the 2 beamed eighth notes, we can start with 1 and. But we see an eighth rest right next to it, so sometimes we feel the need to put an and there and put and 2. Well, that would not be correct, because then we have 2 ands right next to each other. And then if we get it correct in the next beat, we start with 3 and, that's right, but we would not end with and 4, because then we again have 2 ands together. Those two are incorrect. So what is the right way to do these measures? Let's take a look. In the first measure, we have all eighth rests. So we have to count our numbers and the ands in between. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. All 4 beats are there, and we've used plus signs where the ands go. The next measure is an eighth note followed by an eighth rest. Everything in that measure is an eighth. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Notice that all of the eighth notes are underlined for claps, and all of the ands are not underlined because they're rests. Measure 2 and measure 3 are mirror opposites of each other. Measure 2 has the eighth notes on the numbers and the eighth rests on the ands. Measure 3 has the eighth rests on the numbers and the eighth notes on the ands. So we still have to start with the number 1, and we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, but now the ands are underlined because we clap those, and we don't clap where the numbers are because they're rests. The last measure, we start out with 2 beamed eighth notes, both getting claps, 1 and then we have 2 more eighths, so it's going to be 2 and. The only difference is the 2 is hands apart because it's a rest, and the and gets a clap, 2 and. Then we have a single eighth note, 3 with a clap, followed by an eighth rest, and with our hands apart, 3 and. We end with 2 eighths, but an eighth rest first, 4 with our hands apart, and then an and on the last eighth note with a clap, 4 and. Now let's take a look at a few examples where we take eighth rests and add it to the things we've learned in previous tutorials. Our first example starts with 2 eighth notes and a quarter note, 1 and 2. They all get claps. Then we move on to 2 more eighths, an eighth rest followed by an eighth note. So we're going to have 3 and. The 3 is a rest with hands apart, and the and gets a clap, 3 and. We end with 2 more eighths, an eighth rest followed by an eighth note. So the eighth rest is hands apart on count 4, followed by an eighth note, clap on the and after the 4, 4 and. In measure 2, we start with an eighth rest on count 1, and then an eighth note on the and after count 1, 1 and, hands apart, and then a clap. Then 2 simple beamed eighth notes together, 2 and, both with claps, a quarter rest on count 3, hands apart, and a quarter note on count 4 with a clap. Measure 3 starts with a half note worth 2 counts, so we clap on count 1, keep our hands together for count 2, 1, 2. Then we move on to 2 eighths, a note first, an eighth rest second, clap, and then no clap, 3 and. Now we have a quarter note tied across the measure to another quarter note. So clap on count 4 for the quarter note, keep our hands together, and tie it to count 1 in the next measure, 4, 1. Then we have 2 eighths, an eighth note first, and an eighth rest after it. So a clap and then a no clap, 2 and. And then we have 2 more eighths, this time starting with an eighth rest and going to an eighth note. So no clap on 3, but a clap on the and, 3 and. And we end with a quarter rest, hands apart, count 4. Here is a video showing the correct counting and clapping for example number 1.
1 and 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 and 4, 1, 2 and 3 and 4.
Let's take a look at a second example. Example number 2 starts easily enough with a dotted half note worth 3 counts. Clap on count 1 and keep our hands together while we count 2 and 3. 1, 2, 3. Then we have 2 eighth notes. So we know we're going to go 4 and. The last eighth note on the and is tied to the next measure to a whole note. So we clap on 4, we clap on the and then we keep our hands together while we continue to count 1, 2, 3, 4 in the next measure. 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. The next measure starts with a quarter rest, hands apart, count 1, and then we have 2 eighths, an eighth rest followed by an eighth note, 2 and. No clap and then clap. Then 2 more eighths beamed together, both get claps, 3 and then 2 more eighths to end the measure, 4 and, with the 4 being hands apart and the and getting a clap. The last measure starts out with 2 eighths, an eighth note followed by an eighth rest, 1 and. The 1 gets a clap, the and does not. Then 2 more eighths, starting with an eighth rest into an eighth note. So we have 2 and. the 2 hands apart, the and with a clap. We end the measure with a half rest worth 2 counts, hands apart, 3, 4. Here's a video showing the correct counting and clapping for example number 2.
1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4.
Our last example is particularly tricky. We start out with 2 sets of beamed eighth notes, 1 and 2 and. That's going to be our counting. But the middle 2 eighth notes are tied together. So we clap on count 1, we clap on the and, then we keep our hands together because we're tying across to count 2, and then we clap again on the and after 2. It looks like this: 1 and 2 and. Notice no clap on count 2 because it's tied to the and before it. Right after that, we have 2 more eighths, an eighth rest for count 3 and an eighth note for the and after count 3. 3 and. No clap on the rest, yes clap on the eighth note. Then we end with an eighth note followed by an eighth rest, 4 and. The next measure has 4 beamed eighth notes together, but the last one is tied to the quarter note that comes after it. So we're going to count 1 and 2 and, then we're going to count 3 on the quarter note. But we're not going to clap count 3 because it's tied to the and after count 2. So it would look like this: 1 and 2 and 3. After that, we have 2 eighths, 4 on the rest, and on the eighth note that we clap on. But that last eighth note is tied across the measure to the count 1 quarter note in the next measure. So we're going to count 4 and 1 on this next part, but we don't clap on the 1 because it's tied together. 4 and 1. We keep our hands together between the and the 1 because we're making a longer note. Then we have a very simple quarter note on count 2. Then we have 2 eighths, 3 and, clap, no clap, and we end that measure with a quarter rest, no clap, 4. The last measure starts out with 4 eighths, an eighth rest, an eighth note, an eighth rest, and an eighth note. So it's going to be 1 and 2 and. And the claps are going to come on the notes which are on the ands, 1 and 2 and. Count 3 is a quarter rest by itself with our hands apart. And we end example number 3 with count 4, 4 and, 2 eighths, note and rest. Here's a video showing the correct counting and clapping for our final example number 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and 1, 2, 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and. This tutorial explained how to count and clap eighth rests. It provided examples of rhythm patterns containing a mixture of notes and rests that included eighth rests. The next tutorial in this series adds single and double beamed 16th notes to various rhythm patterns.